Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking a really concentrated plunge into a state that I think embodies, well, the paradox of the modern South.
Georgia.
Georgia, exactly. You know it as the Peach State, of course.
But also the Empire State of the South. That's the older one.
And that's really our mission today. We want to distill the essence of this incredibly complex place, tracing it from this very peculiar colonial experiment all the way up to its current status.
A hyper-competitive global hub that is, let's be honest, dictating national politics right now.
It really is.
And you absolutely have to start with the scale of the place because Georgia's impact, I think, is just routinely underestimated.
Okay, so give us the numbers.
Geographically, it's the 24th largest, so, respectable. But its real power is in its population density. It's the 8th most populous state in the country.
And what's the latest estimate?
For 2024, it's clocking in at around 11.18 million people.
And the key to understanding that population and really all the politics and economics that follow is Atlanta.
Precisely. The Atlanta metropolitan area, it's a massive, sprawling thing.
It's huge.
It's home to over 6.3 million people as of last year.
So just do the math on that. That's more than half the state.
It's 57% of Georgia's entire population. That concentration in one single metro area is, well, it's arguably the single most important factor shaping the state today.
It's like a gravitational pull.
It is. It just fundamentally alters the statewide economy, the social composition, everything.
Which makes Atlanta far more than just some regional city. It's a true global city.
Oh, absolutely. It's a recognized world center for trade, for logistics, finance. To frame the stakes for you, the listener, just consider this.
Yeah.
If you went back to 2005 and you treated Georgia like its own country,
Okay.
its economy would have been the 28th largest in the entire world.
Oh, no.
And by 2018, its gross state product was already over $600 billion. So yeah, this is not some sleepy southern state. This is an immense engine of global commerce.
And that's what makes its history and its recent political chaos so important for everyone to understand. All right, let's unpack it. We have to start at the beginning because the original vision for this colony was, well, it was radically different from its neighbors.
It was almost like a social engineering project. Georgia was the last and the southernmost of the original 13 colonies. Established pretty late, too, 1732.
And the first settlement, Savannah, was a year later.
1733, yeah. The name, of course, was just a straight homage to the king at the time, King George II.
But the initial plan, this Oglethorpe plan, it was almost utopian, especially on the issue of labor.
It was. General James Oglethorpe, who founded the whole thing, he envisioned this agrarian society built on small, virtuous yeoman farmers.
No huge plantations.
Exactly. The rules were strict on land ownership, and, critically, the initial plan prohibited slavery.
Okay, prohibiting slavery in the 1730s in the southern colony. That sounds basically impossible from an economic standpoint at the time.
It was a direct challenge to the whole system in, say, South Carolina next door. The trustees who founded the colony, they wanted this unique structure.
And it wasn't just slavery they banned, right?
No, they also initially banned rum and lawyers.
Rum and lawyers. So they were really going for a moralistic society.
Totally. They thought this small-scale farming approach would create a kind of buffer zone for debtors and the worthy poor between Spanish Florida and the big, rich British colonies.
So why did it fall apart so fast?
It just wasn't economically viable, not in the long run, especially when settlers started coming in from other colonies who wanted to get rich using enslaved labor. The restrictions just hampered growth.
So the colonists themselves pushed back.
Immense pressure. So by 1752, the trustees were facing debt, their subsidies from the crown were running out, and they just relinquished control.
And Georgia becomes a royal colony.
Yep. And immediately, the restrictions on large land holdings and, most importantly, a prohibition on slavery were just gone. The experiment was over. Georgia fell right in line with the rest of the South.
But despite that rocky start, they were all in on the revolution.
Oh, completely. The delegates unanimously approved the Declaration of Independence. And when it came time to form the new country, Georgia was one of the first on board.
10th to ratify the Articles of Confederation.
In 1778, and then famously the fourth state to ratify the U.S. Constitution, January 2nd, 1788.
Now here's where it gets really interesting, because Georgia originally claimed this massive piece of land stretching west.
All the way to the Mississippi.
And it was forced to give it up in a scandal that just screams early Republic corruption. Tell us about the Yazoo land sales.
This was a colossal political and legal firestorm. It was a huge deal.
So they claimed all that land.
Right. And in 1795, the state legislature was bribed, just flagrantly bribed, to sell off huge chunks of this western territory.
How much land are we talking?
About 35 million acres. For ridiculously low prices to 4 land speculation companies. That was the Yazoo land sale.
I mean, that's the dictionary definition of corruption. There had to be a huge backlash.
Ooh, the outrage was so intense that the next legislature in 1796 repealed the whole thing. They even symbolically burned the records with a magnifying glass focused on the sun.
But the land had already been sold, right?
Exactly. The companies had already resold it to third parties, which created a legal nightmare. So to fix it, Georgia just ceded all its western lands, what would become Alabama and Mississippi, to the federal government.
In exchange for what?
A payment of $1.25 million. And just like that, the map of the Deep South was fundamentally redrawn.
And losing all that western land, ironically, that drives settlement pressure inward, which leads almost right away to gold being discovered.
And to one of the darkest chapters in the state's history.
Indigenous removal.
Yeah. The Georgia Gold Rush kicked off in 1829 in the northern mountains, and it prompted this colossal rush of settlers right onto land that was occupied by the sovereign Cherokee Nation.
And this was real gold.
Oh, yeah. The federal government even set up a mint in a town called Dahlonega that ran right up until the Civil War.
So that influx creates the political will for the Indian Removal Act.
It directly fueled it.
Yeah.
President Andrew Jackson's whole push for the act in 1830 was driven by this desire for land and gold. But the Cherokee Nation, they fought back in the court.
And they won, right? The Supreme Court sided with them.
Definitively. In 1832, the Supreme Court, with Chief Justice John Marshall, ruled in Worcester v. Georgia that the states couldn't enforce their laws within Cherokee territory. They upheld tribal sovereignty.
But it didn't matter.
It's one of the most famous examples of a president just ignoring the Supreme Court. Jackson allegedly said, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it."
And he just didn't.
He didn't. And the state of Georgia helped run a land lottery to give away Cherokee land.
Which results in the Trail of Tears.
The devastating aftermath. In 1838, the federal military was sent in to forcibly round up and deport the Cherokee tribes west of the Mississippi.
A forced march.
Under horrific conditions. It led to the deaths of an estimated 4,000 Cherokee people from exposure, disease, and starvation. It's a foundational tragedy, and it's directly tied to those resources in North Georgia.
That history of conflict, territory, resource extraction, it feels like a perfect prelude to the Civil War, where Georgia was absolutely central to the Confederacy.
It chose to secede early, January 19th, 1861, one of the original 7 Confederate states, and its value is immense.
Because of the railroads and agriculture?
Railroads, agriculture, manufacturing, especially textiles. It was literally the supply hub for the entire Confederacy.
So the military campaign against Georgia wasn't just about winning battles. It was about destroying the South's ability to even wage war.
That's it, exactly. I mean, you have huge, bloody battles like Chickamauga and Kennesaw Mountain, but the real pivot point was the fall of Atlanta in September 1864.
And that led directly to Sherman.
To General William Tecumseh Sherman's strategic and psychological campaign, the infamous March to the Sea.
How devastating was that, really?
It was total war. It was aimed at civilian infrastructure. Starting in November 1864, his forces just systematically destroyed a 60-mile-wide path from Atlanta all the way to Savannah.
So they weren't just fighting.
No. They tore up 300 miles of railroad track. They would heat the rails and twist them around trees. They called them Sherman's neckties. They destroyed cotton gins, mills, burned crops. The psychological damage was just as big as the economic damage.
And the human cost of the war for the state was staggering.
Horrific. On the Confederate side, 18,253 Georgian soldiers were killed. That's roughly 1 in 5 men from Georgia who served. They didn't come home.
And on the Union side, Georgia was home to one of the most notorious sites of the whole war.
Andersonville Prison.
A name that still just carries so much weight.
It's an enduring scar. It was formerly Camp Sumter, and it was infamous for overcrowding, no sanitation, starvation rations. Nearly 13,000 Union prisoners of war died there.
Mostly from disease and starvation.
Exactly, just inhumane conditions. And the consequences for the camp's commander, Henry Wirz, were swift after the war.
He was executed, right?
Tried for war crimes, convicted, and hanged. He is the highest-ranking Confederate official to be executed after the conflict.
So at that level of destruction and trauma, getting back into the Union must have been a long, messy process.
It was incredibly protracted. Georgia actually holds the distinction of being the very last of the former Confederate states to be readmitted.
The last one. When did that happen?
Not until July 15th, 1870. And even then, federal troops stayed in the state for another 7 years, until Reconstruction officially ended in 1877.
Which really takes us right into part two, because once those federal troops leave, the conflict just shifts. It goes from a military occupation to a systemic, political, and social one.
Exactly. White Democrats regain power, and they immediately engineer a new system for total political dominance. The goal was crystal clear.
Maintain white control and suppress the power of the newly enfranchised black population.
And poor whites, who might ally with them. This was all done through legislation, what we call disfranchisement. They passed a poll tax in 1877.
Which was designed to stop poor people from voting.
By requiring a cash payment, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially black citizens.
But the poll tax was just one tool.
Yeah.
The white primary. That seems like it was even more effective at just excluding black voices entirely.
It was a brilliant and just a nefarious legal trick. In 1908, they set up the white primary. Now, since the Democratic Party had a total monopoly on power, winning their primary was the only election that mattered.
So if you're not in the primary, you have no say.
Exactly. By legally calling the primary a private affair of the party, they could legally exclude black voters. It made the general election completely meaningless for them.
And you could track the demographic results of these laws pretty directly.
You absolutely can. In 1900, African Americans were a massive 46.7% of the state's population, almost half.
Wow.
But because of these disenfranchisement laws, and also because of the Great Migration, where black citizens left the South for jobs in the North,
That number just plummeted.
it dropped significantly. By 1960, it was down to 28%. The state successfully engineered a politically marginalized minority.
And this era also has that dark legacy of extra-legal violence. Lynching.
The statistics are horrifying. They really speak to the climate of terror.
Yeah.
Between 1877 and 1950, Georgia recorded 531 deaths from lynching, the second highest total in the entire South.
And this environment, of course, was bolstered by the rise of white supremacist groups.
Which brings us to Stone Mountain.
Right.
Stone Mountain holds a really significant and dark place in this history. The second version of the Ku Klux Klan was formally brought back into existence there.
When was this?
Thanksgiving night, 1915. And this revival was partly spurred on by this incredibly controversial case happening in Atlanta at the time.
The murder of Mary Fagan and the lynching of Leo Frank.
Yeah.
Tell us about the ripple effect of that one event.
So in 1913, a 13-year-old factory worker named Mary Fagan was murdered. Her Jewish supervisor, Leo Frank, was convicted. But there was mounting evidence he was innocent, and the governor even commuted his death sentence to life in prison.
But a mob took him from the prison.
An armed mob, calling themselves the Knights of Mary Fagan, kidnapped Frank from his cell and lynched him in Marietta in 1915.
And this wasn't just a local tragedy. This was a national event.
It really was, and it had these profound consequences. Frank's lynching immediately galvanized the Jewish community across the country. It was a direct catalyst for the formal creation of the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL.
So that tragic event in Georgia directly led to a major national civil rights organization.
It did, specifically to fight anti-Semitism and bias.
It's just an incredible juxtaposition. A state dealing with this intense internal social turmoil, but at the same time, it's quietly hosting the highest levels of national economic planning.
You're talking about Jekyll Island.
That secret meeting in 1910.
Yeah, it's astonishing. In November 1910, this small, super secretive group of the nation's most powerful bankers and politicians, we're talking people from J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, European finance, they all met secretly on Jekyll Island.
To plan what?
To draft the plan for a new, permanent American central banking system. The plans they drew up in secret on that Georgia island led directly to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913.
Wow, so the Fed was basically born on a beach in Georgia.
In secret. A fact that is often completely overshadowed by the state's more visible struggles.
And speaking of struggles, let's jump forward to the mid-20th century, the Civil Rights era. This is where Georgia's role is fundamentally redefined, not just in the South, but for the whole country.
And that transformation was led by Georgia natives. Most famously, of course, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Atlanta-born.
Yep. He came from the educated black middle class of the city, and he used Atlanta as the perfect base of operations. It was central, it was economically powerful, and it had this strong network of churches and universities.
Which led to the formation of one of the most important civil rights groups in the South.
The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC. Dr. King co-founded it right there in Atlanta in 1957, focusing on nonviolent direct action. And the city has really honored him. His tomb is now a national historical park.
Now, the state government was, I imagine, often reluctant to change, but some leaders did embrace it.
Yeah, there were some who saw which way the wind was blowing. Atlanta's mayor, Ivan Allen Jr., was one of the only white Southern politicians to actually testify before Congress in favor of the Civil Rights Act.
That's a big deal.
Huge. And Governor Carl Sanders worked with the Kennedy administration to make sure the state complied with the new federal laws. He helped manage that difficult transition away from segregation.
And that cooperation led to real political breakthroughs for African-American leaders.
It absolutely did. You start to see the integration of the state government. Julian Bond was elected to the Georgia House in 1965, and then Andrew Young was elected to Congress in 72.
And he was the first African-American congressman from Georgia since when?
Since Reconstruction ended in 1877. A huge gap.
Which all culminates in this really powerful declaration for Jimmy Carter when he becomes governor.
Yeah, in 1970, in his inaugural address, Governor Jimmy Carter declared that the time for racial discrimination is over.
A Southern governor saying that in 1970.
It was seen as a major moral and political pivot point for the whole region. And of course, Carter used that image as a progressive Southern voice to get all the way to the White House. He became the 39th president.
Before we move on to the state's physical environment, we have to talk about this chilling Cold War story you found. A missing nuclear bomb.
Yeah, this is a detail that's often forgotten, but it's pretty serious. On February 5th, 1958, a B-47 bomber collided with a fighter jet during a training mission.
Okay.
To save the plane and make an emergency landing, the bomber crew jettisoned a Mark 15 hydrogen bomb, a 7,600-pound weapon.
They just dropped it. Where?
Off the coast of Tybee Island, near Savannah.
A hydrogen bomb is just sitting off the coast of Georgia.
Well, officials believe its plutonium core had been removed, so it couldn't create a full nuclear blast. But it still had conventional explosives that could scatter uranium everywhere.
A radiological threat.
A serious one. They searched for it extensively in the 60s, but it was never found. The current belief is that the Tybee bomb is still buried deep in the silt at the bottom of Wausau Sound.
That is an unnerving piece of Cold War history. Okay, let's shift now to what shapes the state physically. Its geography, climate, and ecology. Because Georgia is not just the flat, humid place many people imagine.
Not at all. Its complexity is rooted in its geology. It has 5 main physiographic regions, each one totally different from the next.
Okay, break them down for us.
So in the far northwest corner, you've got a tiny, rugged piece of the Cumberland Plateau. Next to that is the Ridge and Valley Appalachians.
Then you get into the mountains.
The Blue Ridge Mountains, yeah. Heavily forested, beautiful, and that's where you'll find the state's highest point. Then south of that is the Piedmont, which means foot of the mountain. That's central Georgia, where Atlanta is.
And that region transitions into the coastal plain.
At a geological feature called the fall line, where the rivers drop steeply, and that marks the start of the 5th and largest region, the huge flat Atlantic coastal plain that covers the whole southern half of the state.
And that creates some pretty extreme elevation differences.
It does. The highest point is Brasstown Bald in the Blue Ridge at 4,784 feet. The lowest, of course, is the Atlantic Ocean at sea level.
So the climate is mostly humid subtropical.
Predominantly, yeah. Long, hot, humid summers. But the northern mountains get high enough that they can get snow and have much cooler temperatures.
And the state is incredibly well watered. It gets a lot of rain.
A ton of precipitation. Anywhere from 45 inches a year in the middle of the state up to 75 inches in the Northeast Mountains. And all that water fuels this immense biodiversity.
How diverse are we talking?
Roughly 250 native tree species, a remarkable number. Red cedar, pines, oaks, cypress, even the subtropical sable palmetto down on the coast. And the state protects 58 specific plant species, like yellow jasmine and mountain laurel.
What stands out in terms of animals?
The white-tailed deer population is thriving. You can find them in almost every county. Georgia's also home to about 160 bird species, with the brown thrasher being the state bird.
And reptiles?
79 species. You've got venomous snakes like the eastern diamondback, and of course American alligators down in the coastal plain. plus 63 species of amphibians.
But you highlighted a major modern ecological problem, an invasive lizard, the Argentine tegu.
Yeah, this is a classic modern ecological battle. The Argentine black and white tegu is this massive lizard. It can get up to 4 feet long. It's smart, it's adaptable.
And was introduced through the pet trade.
Exactly. And now they have breeding populations in the wild, and they are devastating predators. They eat the eggs of ground nesting birds, gopher tortoises, even alligators. They are a direct threat to Georgia's native protected species.
Know what's being done.
State and federal agencies are in a constant battle, trying to track and trap them just to manage their spread. It's a tough fight.
And for the anglers out there, the fishing is pretty good too.
Excellent, across the board. In freshwater, you're looking for trout in the cold mountain streams, plus bass and catfish. And on the coast, you've got red drum, tarpon, flounder, a huge variety.
Okay, that brings us to part 3, the part that really earns Georgia that Empire State of the South nickname. This is the economic powerhouse.
The financial strength is foundational to this whole story. Georgia consistently holds the highest possible credit rating, AAA, from Standard & Poor's. But here is the most striking modern stat.
Okay.
For 12 consecutive years, as of 2025, Area Development Magazine has named Georgia the #1 top state for doing business.
12 years in a row, that's not a fluke.
Not at all. That kind of success requires a very specific strategy: tax incentives, predictable regulation, and attracting huge corporations.
And it's become a major headquarters hub.
A huge one. We're talking massive global players. Home Depot, Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, Aflac, UPS.
And that UPS moved to Sandy Springs back in '91. That was a big statement.
It was a profound statement about logistics. UPS, one of the world's biggest companies, chose a Georgia suburb for one reason: unparalleled infrastructure access. That is the core of their #1 ranking: logistics and connectivity.
So what makes the infrastructure so good?
The state is ranked second in the whole country for infrastructure and global access. It has the most extensive rail system in the southeast, but the real clincher is the roads.
Interstates.
Yeah. Georgia's major interstates connect to an incredible 80% of the U.S. population within a 2-day truck drive. If you need to ship something, Georgia is often the fastest way to do it.
That all suggests low operating costs. But you found this weird paradox when you look at the average citizen.
A huge tension.
It's ranked as highly affordable, but people have a lot of personal debt.
It's a genuine puzzle that points to some serious income disparity. A 2024 study listed Georgia in the top 20 for affordability. So, utilities, groceries, they're relatively cheap.
Why?
But 2025 data showed Georgia leading the entire country in searches for personal loans, nearly twice the volume of most other states.
So it's cheap to live there, but people are desperate for loans. Why?
Yeah. The leading idea is that it's about the rapid population growth and income inequality around Atlanta. The city itself is very expensive, which skews the numbers, and a lot of lower-income Georgians outside that core metro just haven't seen their wages keep up with the state's corporate boom.
So they're relying on loans to fill the gaps?
High-interest personal loans, yeah. The wealth is concentrated, but the cost of living pressure is spread out.
And yet, despite that strain, the housing construction market is on fire.
Absolutely booming. Georgia was one of the top 7 states that accounted for over half of all new home construction permits in 2024. But crucially, it's managing to stay affordable while building at that scale.
So they're actually building enough inventory to meet the demand.
Which is preventing that kind of runaway housing costs you see in other high-growth places like Austin or Miami.
Now, the absolute kings of Georgia's connectivity are the airport and the seaports. Let's start with Hartsfield-Jackson, ATL.
ATL is, in a word, unparalleled. It is consistently ranked the world's busiest and most efficient airport.
We're talking over 100 million passengers a year.
Over 100 million. And its operations employ more than 60,000 people. The modern airport we see today was basically set up by a huge expansion project they finished in 1980, which just positioned it perfectly for the decades of growth that followed.
And the maritime power at the Port of Savannah is just as big.
A colossal operation. It's the 3rd busiest seaport in the United States and the 4th largest and fastest growing container port in North America.
In 2023, it handled, what, 4.9 million TEUs?
Yeah, and for anyone not in logistics, a TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit. It's the standard size of a shipping container.
So nearly 5 million of those massive boxes in 1 year.
To handle that kind of volume, the Port of Savannah's Garden City Terminal is the largest single container terminal in all of North America. It's a monumental asset.
So what industries are fueling all this?
Yeah.
What's moving on all these planes, trains, and ships? Let's start with manufacturing.
Historically, it was textiles. The whole I-75 corridor near Dalton and Calhoun is still a major center for carpet and flooring. But today, transportation manufacturing is the big growth engine.
Like Kia.
Exactly. The South Korean automaker Kia set up its first U.S. plant in West Point, Georgia, back in 2009.
They're looking forward. The state is making a big push into electric vehicles.
A very aggressive push. Rivian, the EV company, is building a massive new facility near Social Circle, scheduled to start production in 2024. It shows the state is really trying to cement its place in high-tech transportation.
But Georgia's traditional image is tied to the land. Agriculture has to still be a massive industry.
Oh, it's incredibly vital. I mean, this is where you get some of the state's most iconic exports. Georgia is the #1 producer of pecans in the world.
The world.
The world. The Albany region in the Southwest is the global center for pecan production.
And we have to give a shout out to the woman who was key to its peanut industry.
Absolutely. Naomi Chapman Woodruff. Her research in peanut breeding developed strains that produced yields 5 times the typical amount. She was instrumental in making Georgia a top peanut producer.
And then there's the poultry.
The kingdom that feeds the nation. Georgia produces more chickens than any other state. The city of Gainesville proudly and, rightfully calls itself the poultry capital of the world.
And of course, peaches and Vidalia onions.
Can't forget those. The peaches give the state its nickname, and the Vidalia onion is the official state vegetable. It's so important. It's regulated by law.
Okay, let's talk about the flashier modern industry. Film and TV. The Hollywood of the South.
It is a remarkable economic story, driven almost entirely by some very competitive tax incentives. And it has worked. Atlanta is now firmly established as the Hollywood of the South.
The growth was explosive.
In 2016, Georgia actually surpassed California in the number of feature films produced on location.
And the economic impact is huge.
By fiscal year 2017, it was already at $9.5 billion. And it's not just movies, it's these huge TV series that set up shop there for years.
Give us some of the big names that have filmed there.
Oh, the list is huge.
Yeah.
Massive streaming hits like Stranger Things, iconic cable shows like The Walking Dead, and then the blockbuster movies, Black Panther, Captain America, Civil War. It's turned Atlanta into a year-round global media production hub.
And finally, in this economic section, how does Georgia power all this?
Very high electricity demand. Natural gas and coal are still the primary fuels for most of it, but nuclear power is hugely significant.
How much?
Almost a quarter of the state's total electricity comes from nuclear, from plants like Plant Hatch and Plant Vogtle.
And Vogtle is building new reactors, right?
Yes, the first new nuclear units built in the U.S. in decades, which shows a real commitment to non-carbon power. At the same time, they're heavily investing in solar. As far back as 2013, they were ranked 15th in the nation for solar capacity after a massive investment spike. They're diversifying.
All right, let's pivot to part 4. The culture, the education, and the hyper-volatile politics that define the state today. First, what are the major cultural contributions?
Georgia has a really deep and vibrant cultural life. In fine arts, you've got the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, and the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra is the largest arts organization in the whole Southeast.
And it's interesting, Atlanta has been the setting for 2 Best Picture Oscar winners.
That's a powerful link between its history and its film image. You've got the classic Gone with the Wind winning in 1939 and then Driving Miss Daisy in 1989. And of course, major literary works like The Color Purple by Alice Walker.
But the state's musical influence is arguably even bigger on a global scale.
Oh, for sure. Music is just integral to the Georgian identity. You have Ray Charles, a native son, whose version of Georgia on My Mind is the official state song.
And Gladys Knight.
Midnight Train to Georgia. In rock, you have the Allman Brothers, the Black Crowes.
And you have to talk about the underground scenes that birthed whole new genres.
The Athens music scene in the 80s and 90s was profoundly influential. It sparked a global alternative rock movement. Bands like REM, Widespread Panic, the B-52s, they all came out of this one college town.
But Atlanta's specific contribution to modern global culture is probably hip-hop and R&B.
Since the 90s, Atlanta has become the global epicenter for that sound. It displaced New York and LA artists like Outkast, Usher, Ludacris, TLC. They've defined modern pop music for decades.
Okay, turning to sports, Georgia seems to embrace both collegiate passion and professional excellence.
It does. It has teams in all four major leagues: the Braves, Falcons, Hawks, and Atlanta United in soccer. But college sports are a religion there.
Clean, old-fashioned hate.
The rivalry between the Georgia Bulldogs and Georgia Tech, one of the most passionate in all of college sports.
And Atlanta has proven it can host the world's biggest events.
Absolutely. The 1996 Summer Olympics, which left a huge legacy on the city's infrastructure. And looking ahead, it's hosting multiple games for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. And of course, the Masters golf tournament in Augusta every year.
We also have to mention one of the most famous and maybe notorious figures in baseball history came from Georgia.
Ty Cobb. A very complex legacy, but he was from Narrows, Georgia. First player ever inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, and his nickname was the Georgia Peach.
Let's talk education, which is obviously fueling all this workforce growth we talk about.
The state has a deep educational history. The University of Georgia, UGA, founded in 1785, is the country's oldest state-chartered university. The whole system produces about 90,000 graduates a year.
And central to funding all that is the Hope Scholarship.
The Hope Scholarship is a huge deal for socioeconomic mobility. It's funded entirely by the state lottery.
And it gives tuition assistance to any resident with a 3.0 GPA who goes to a public college in the state.
It's essentially free college tuition based on merit, and its biggest impact might be combating brain drain. It encourages Georgia's best students to stay, study, and enter the local workforce. It's a remarkable piece of social engineering.
And there was also a structural change at the local level that shifted educational representation.
That's right. A lot of local school boards shifted from at-large voting, where everyone votes for every seat, to single-member districts.
Which increased minority representation.
Significantly, it helped make the school boards look more like the students they serve.
And finally, before we get to politics, we have to talk media. Atlanta is a hub.
A massive one. It's the 9th largest media market in the country, and much of that was built by one man, Ted Turner.
CNN, TBS, TNT.
TCM, Headline News. The Weather Channel is also based there. And historically, WSB-TV was the first television service in the entire South, back in 1948.
Okay, this brings us to the most complex part of our deep dive. The dramatic political pendulum swing that has made Georgia the defining swing state of our time.
It's a story of extreme continuity followed by radical change. Before 1964, Georgia had the longest unbroken record of one-party dominance by the Democrats of any state, nearly a century.
And that was maintained by the disenfranchisement tools we talked about earlier.
The poll tax, the white primary, it wasn't popular consensus, it was engineered control.
So what broke that iron grip? It wasn't just the Civil Rights Act. It was a Supreme Court decision about the voting districts themselves.
That is the single most crucial and often overlooked factor: reapportionment. In 1964, the Supreme Court issued two landmark rulings that established the one-man, one-vote principle.
Forcing districts to be based on equal population.
Exactly, not on arbitrary geography or county lines.
And what was the immediate effect of that in Georgia?
It completely rewrote the state's power structure. For decades, power was held by rural counties that were grossly overrepresented. Reapportionment immediately shifted all that power to dense urban areas, primarily Atlanta and its suburbs.
It neutralized the rural control.
It shifted the state's center of gravity right to its growing metropolitan core.
But the ideology of the conservative white voters didn't shift with the geography. They just switched parties.
Exactly. That's the Southern strategy. As the National Democratic Party embraced civil rights, white conservative voters began shifting to the Republican Party. You see it early. Georgia voted for Republican Barry Goldwater in 1964.
And that trend just continued.
Between 1960 and 2020, the state only supported a Democrat for president 4 times.
Jimmy Carter twice, Bill Clinton once, and Joe Biden once.
And that Republican ascendancy really took hold in the 90s and 2000s. You have Newt Gingrich from Georgia becoming Speaker of the House in 94, and then in 2002, Sonny Perdue became the first Republican governor since Reconstruction.
A complete reversal.
By 2004, Republicans controlled all 3 branches of state government. The century of Democratic dominance was officially over.
And now, thanks to all that urbanization and demographic change, Georgia's volatility has made it the definitive swing state.
The 2020 election sealed that status forever. Joe Biden carried the state by just 11,779 votes, a razor-thin margin that brought the entire national spotlight right to Georgia.
And the elections that followed were even more dramatic.
The 2020 Senate runoffs were a national obsession. They decided control of the U.S. Senate.
And Democrats won both.
They did. John Ossoff became the state's first Jewish senator, and Raphael Warnock became its first black senator. And their wins were widely attributed to the diversifying Atlanta suburbs and massive turnout among young and African American voters.
The pendulum just keeps swinging. We can't talk about 2020 without talking about the Republican rebound since then.
The hypervolatility is the new norm. In 2022, Republican Governor Brian Kemp won re-election by a comfortable 7.5%, a huge margin.
Strong ticket split.
A very strong one. And then, most recently, in the 2024 presidential election, the state flipped back to the Republican column
Donald Trump won it.
by about 115,000 votes. So the pattern is clear. It's a hyper-competitive battleground state where presidential races are razor close, maybe favoring Republicans slightly, but Senate races can go Democratic because of that massive metro turnout.
It really is a state divided. And one last structural detail. All those counties.
159 counties, second only to Texas, and uniquely, Georgia is the only state that still has sole commissioner counties.
What does that even mean, a sole commissioner county?
It means one single elected person holds both the legislative and executive power for the entire county government. They set the budget, hire people, pass laws, all without a county board to check their power.
Wow.
It's rare now, mostly in rural areas, but it reflects this deeply decentralized, sometimes autocratic local tradition that is just a world away from the modern governance of the Atlanta metro.
What a journey. From the anti-slavery ideals of the Oglethorpe Plan to the Trail of Tears and Jim Crow, only to emerge as a global corporate hub that dictates national politics.
That contrast is the key tension we uncovered. You have the deep agrarian history, the peaches, pecans, poultry right alongside this ultra-modern identity as a global logistics hub with the world's busiest airport and that massive port.
And its history of conflict directly shapes its present.
The legacy of the civil rights movement directly shaped the diversifying demographics, and that diversity is the fuel for its political volatility today.
So what does this all mean for the future? We talked about those crucial 1960 Supreme Court rulings. One man, one vote.
That shift, combined with the nonstop population growth around Atlanta, it fundamentally and permanently neutralized decades of rural political control.
Meaning the state's future is controlled by its diversifying suburbs and that powerful urban core.
The demographic and economic momentum behind Atlanta is so profound that it guarantees Georgia will stay a hyper-competitive global economic, media, and political swing state for the foreseeable future. The state is permanently polarized between the overwhelming power of the core and the traditional identity of the perimeter.
And here's where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. Think about Georgia's historic pattern of being the last state to join major American movements.
The last of the 13 colonies, the last to be readmitted to the Union.
Right. Its current role as a volatile leading swing state is a radical reversal of that entire history. It's not lagging anymore. It's leading the national conversation. It's defining the razor-thin margins that decide who holds national power.
And if you want a symbol of that dual identity, the traditional roots meeting modern dynamism, I'd say you should research the story behind one of the state symbols.
Like what?
You could look into the Cherokee rose, which is often said to symbolize the tears shed during the Trail of Tears, or brown thrasher, the state bird, which is common but incredibly resilient. Which symbol do you think best embodies this complicated present? The scar of history or the persistence of the natural world thriving despite all the human conflict?
That is a great thought to mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the paradox of the Peach State.
Always a pleasure.